On a hot afternoon in July of 1985, a Soviet officer climbed into the trunk of a British car a few miles from the Finnish border. Above him, KGB border guards walked the checkpoint with sniffer dogs trained to find one thing: a human being hidden where no human should be. If they caught his scent, he would be pulled out, driven back to Moscow, and executed. What those guards could not have imagined was that the man folded into that trunk had spent 11 years handing the West the Soviet Union's most closely guarded secrets. He was a colonel in the KGB. He was the station chief running Soviet intelligence in London, and the entire time he had been working for the other side. His name was Oleg Gordievsky, and British intelligence would come to call him the most valuable spy they ever ran inside the Soviet Union. This is the story of how a true believer turned against the system he served. The warning he passed that may have helped pull the world back from a nuclear war almost no one knew was coming, and the desperate escape that should never have worked. To understand why a loyal KGB officer would risk everything to betray his own country, you have to go back to where his faith first began to crack. Oleg Gordievsky was born in Moscow in 1938, into the very heart of the Soviet security state. His father was an officer in the secret police. In his family, espionage was quite literally the family business. Brilliant and fluent in several languages, Gordievsky rose fast. By the early 1960s, he joined the elite foreign intelligence arm of the KGB, training extensively to live abroad under false identities. Then came the moments that transformed him. In 1961, posted to East Berlin, he watched up close as the Berlin Wall went up, trapping millions overnight. In 1968, Soviet tanks rolled into Czechoslovakia to crush the peaceful Prague Spring reform movement. Something quietly broke inside him. He had been raised to believe the Soviet system was the future, but he saw instead a regime that survived solely by walling its people in and crushing dissent. For years, he carried this disillusionment in silence. But Western intelligence noticed his quiet detachment. In 1974, while stationed in Copenhagen, Gordievsky was secretly recruited by Britain's MI6. Crucially, he did not turn for money, revenge, or glory. He did it out of pure conscience, believing the West was right. This made him nearly impossible to catch. The typical warning signs of a traitor, such as sudden wealth or lavish spending, simply did not exist. Over the next decade, Gordievsky led a double life that would have shattered most people. To the KGB, he was a rising star. To MI6, he was a window directly into the mind of the Kremlin. Operating under various code names, the intelligence he handed over was extraordinary. He exposed Soviet agents across Europe and revealed the inner workings of the KGB. The British shared these insights with the Americans, making Gordievsky one of the West's most vital assets behind the Iron Curtain. By April of 1985, he reached the top of the ladder. He was named the KGB's station chief in London, meaning the man running Moscow's entire UK spy network answered in secret to the British. Yet his single most important achievement was not exposing individual spies. It was stopping an accidental war. In the early 1980s, Cold War tensions were at a dangerous peak. President Ronald Reagan was calling the USSR an evil empire, while an aging Soviet leadership gripped by paranoia launched Operation Ryan, a massive peacetime intelligence-gathering effort to watch for signs of a surprise Western nuclear strike. Agents were desperately tracking everything from late-night lights in government offices to the price of blood at donor banks. In November 1983, this paranoia nearly triggered a catastrophe during NATO's Able Archer training exercise. The simulation of nuclear launch procedures was so realistic, and Soviet nerves were so raw, that Moscow feared it was a cover for a real first strike. Nuclear forces in Eastern Europe were placed on high alert, bringing the world terrifyingly close to nuclear war. It was Gordievsky who defused the crisis. He informed his British handlers that the Soviets were not bluffing. Their fear was genuine. This vital warning reached Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, convincing them that their tough rhetoric was being dangerously misread as preparation for war. Consequently, the superpower tone began to soften, pulling both nations back from the brink. Gordievsky walked this tightrope for 11 years, but his downfall came from an entirely different betrayal. In Washington, a CIA officer named Aldrich Ames sold the names of Western sources to the KGB for cash. Armed with the knowledge of a high-level leak in London, suspicion slowly closed in on Gordievsky. In May 1985, weeks after his promotion, he was abruptly recalled to Moscow under the guise of confirming his new role. Sensing the trap, he refused MI6's offer to defect immediately because his wife and 2 young daughters were still in Moscow. Upon arrival, he was taken to a KGB safe house, drugged, and interrogated for hours. Though he managed to give nothing away and was released, he was placed under 24-hour surveillance while the KGB gathered the evidence needed for a firing squad. Knowing he had only one chance, Gordievsky activated a long-prepared MI6 escape plan, codenamed Operation Pimlico. To trigger it, he slipped his tails and stood on a precise Moscow street corner at a designated time, holding a shopping bag while eating a candy bar, a silent signal to his handlers that he needed immediate extraction. On the 19th of July, 1985, Gordievsky shook off his surveillance, boarded a train to Leningrad, and made his way north toward Vyborg, a town near the Finnish border. There, at a bend in a quiet road, he waited for 2 cars from the British embassy. The cars arrived, having shaken off their own tails, and Gordievsky was hidden in the trunk. Then came the border itself and the sniffer dogs. To throw them off, the British officers had brought a wife and a baby along as cover. At the critical moment, snacks and a used baby diaper were used to distract and confuse the dogs just long enough for the cars to roll through. As they crossed into safety, his rescuers slipped a cassette of the Finnish composer Sibelius into the car stereo. The soaring notes of Finlandia signaled to Gordievsky, without a single spoken word, that he was finally free. He remains the only man British intelligence ever successfully extracted from Moscow in this manner. Escape, however, carried a heartbreaking price. His wife and daughters were left behind, and Soviet authorities refused to let them leave for 6 long years until the USSR began to collapse. Tried in his absence, Gordievsky was sentenced to death for treason, a sentence that was never lifted. He spent the remainder of his life under the protection of British intelligence in Surrey, writing books on KGB operations, advising Western leaders, and receiving high honors from the Queen. Oleg Gordievsky passed away quietly in England in March of 2025 at the age of 86. He left behind an extraordinary Cold War legacy. A man who sat at the absolute center of Soviet intelligence and, driven entirely by personal conviction, handed its deepest secrets to the other side to keep a Cold War from turning hot.